GB News. What is the point of you anymore? You started as a supposedly free speech platform to provide voices for more dissident thinkers, and now, just so that we can put the spoilers straight out there, Boris, the most dissident thinker who's ever existed, pushing for literally a more global Britain. That's what he said. I'll play this clip in a moment to confirm it for everybody. But GB News is now just a place where Tory MPs and ministers can vent their spleen for a bit.
Well, and pretend to be right-wing.
And pretend to be right-wing. We're right-wing because we're on GB News, and the only reason that we'd be on GB News is because GB News is right-wing. Why is it right-wing? Because we're on GB News. This is the logic. This is the circular logic that we're going around. We're totally right-wing, guys. Bro, trust me. Now give all of your money to your taxes so that we can fund forever wars in the Middle East, is what I'm expecting Boris Johnson's entire show will be about. So before I get into that, on the subject of debate and conversation, we host some on the platform, on the website, and a recent one was part 2 of the debate on liberalism, which was Carl and Connor versus Josh and Stelios. This was part 2. I've watched part 1. Not watched part 2 yet, although I've heard that this one was slightly less contentious and people were able to get their points across in a better way because our debates, very highbrow, very high level, and so not everybody is always able to get all the points that they're going for. But it's been quite popular so far, and you should watch this one, and you can get it on the website for £5 a month. At least. You can pay a bit more if you'd like to. I'm not going to specify, but you can.
I'd love the idea if every product did that in your life. It's like, a can of Coke, now £1. £2 if you want.
3 if you're feeling real generous.
Yeah, but then who wants to support a Coca-Cola Corporation?
When you could be supporting us instead. And GB News has been a massive S show recently. There was the big controversy with Lawrence Fox, where he got fired because he said that he wouldn't want to have sex with a particular woman, which is always the most offensive thing that you can say to a woman. And then Dan Wootton was suspended because he was there and kind of sniggered along while that whole interaction was going down.
Wouldn't have sex with her.
He also definitely wouldn't have sex with her.
Just to confirm, you wouldn't have sex with her either?
No.
Me neither.
I'm engaged, so I think it would be very bad of me to say that I would actually.
Well, then you just to make sure we can never work on TV again, ever.
There you go. Well, there's my career down the toilet. I guess I'll get my P45 at the end of the week. It's nice speaking to everybody. Calvin Robinson, who is friends with Lawrence Fox.
Also wouldn't sleep with her?
Also wouldn't sleep with her, and also...
How to tell if you're on the distant right?
Yeah.
Would you sleep with this random woman?
No, congratulations.
Well,
That's why there's so many gays on the dissident right. So that explains it all. Calvin, being friends with Lawrence, decided that he would stick up for his mate, and therefore also got kicked off of GB News. So GB News proved in that whole interaction, Calvin spoke about the whole thing on our show recently when he appeared on it, and they just proved that they're just containment, realistically speaking, that if you do actually go outside of the realms of acceptable dialogue, they'll just fire you at a moment's notice. And the whole thing looked like it just imploded at a moment's notice as well, because they suspend Lawrence Fox, and then Lawrence starts tweeting private DMs between people, and the whole thing just looked like a massive S show because everybody started to basically stab each other in the back all at the same time.
Well, I think it was for him about truth, and that's what's been confusing about all of this. Is it really true that you fired all these people because they said the holy sin of I won't have sex with this woman? Or is it because you actually want to remove anyone who has something interesting to say?
Is it because you already wanted to get rid of these people, and this was just a convenient moment?
Because if it's Ofcom, it's Ofcom. Fair enough. Like, you've got to deal with the world you're living in. It sucks, but whatever. You're a TV outlet. I can at least respect them as a company if it was Ofcom. But if it's not, and it's a lie, and instead you just don't like these people because they're not wet Tories, well, then I have no respect, because that's just embarrassing. And also goes against what you say publicly.
Well, at least it freed up a slot for wet Tories. Boris Johnson, in particular, being the wettest Tory, because let us forget that Boris Johnson was the man who put us all in lockdown for over a year.
He spiked immigration.
Spiked immigration after promising that he would use Brexit to get Brexit done, which everybody kind of assumed meant lower immigration. I guess more
was a campaign promise.
Yeah, it was a campaign promise. more fool us, I suppose, for believing you when you promise to do things that you say that you'll do, but guess we're just kind of naive like that. But let's listen to what Boris says here, because it really is quite
Johnson here.
horrifying.
Hi folks, Boris Johnson here. I'm excited to say that I'm shortly going to be joining you on GB News, and I'm going to be giving this remarkable new TV channel my unvarnished views on everything from Russia, China, the war in Ukraine, how we meet all those challenges, to the huge opportunities that lie ahead for us, why I think our best days are yet to come, and why, on the whole, the people of the world want to see more global Britain, not less. So join me on GB News for some great British television.
If you're wondering why he looks so haggard, it's because evil sits heavy on a man's soul. But also, did you hear that bit at the end there? Where he said why the world wants a more global Britain and not less.
Yeah, because that doesn't mean what we think it means. We think, well, if you were to take the steelman position of that, it's, well, more international trade, being able to have influence all over the world, which sounds like a good
being
thing.
a more powerful entity on the global stage so that we're able to exert our own influence and set our own terms for how we interact with the rest of the countries of the world.
And that's what everyone thought he meant when he got into power. And then when he did, he turned it into...
No, he just meant a more globalist Britain. That's all he meant, was just more compliance with the international community, more compliance
the global
with...
elite is all that means.
What? Sorry?
Well, that's all that actually means ever, isn't it?
Yeah,
What is the
global
international
elite.
community? The global elite deciding a country's fate instead of its own populace.
The sorts of people that all show up at the World Economic Forum gatherings every single year, everything that they agree with, more net zero, more migration, more taxes. That's what it meant. More wars as well. That's always a fun one that we get into, is that we always get more wars. And The Guardian were complaining about this, but to be fair, I agree. I agree. I don't want Boris Johnson either. His salary hasn't been disclosed. There's some interesting information here. But he's likely to receive a six-figure sum. Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's also on the channel and also completely useless, is paid £350,000 a year. And the Tory deputy chair, Lee Anderson, gets £100,000 a year from the channel. So this really is just a place where Tory ministers and MPs can show up and get paid to talk about things and pretend the right wing, as you said. But Johnson already earns a high six-figure sum as a columnist for the Daily Mail and has made millions of pounds on the speaking circuit since he was ousted from Number 10 more than a year ago. So it's nice to know that after completely and totally betraying your country, you can get some lucrative deals to do some cheap columns and cheap speeches immediately after. I mean, how much effort do you think he actually puts into any of that?
None. I'm sorry, but he really is an actually massively dishonorable individual to betray the electorate in every possible metric that he promised, and then to turn around and make millions and just act like nothing happened.
Hi folks, we've rolled out a new feature on the website, which is the ability to pay for an individual piece of content. So usually it's £5 a month every month to subscribe to all of the content on the website. But I appreciate there are going to be people who simply don't want to do that. They would be interested instead in purchasing a single piece of content for a lower amount, and they've got a particular niche that they're interested in watching. And so they don't want every single piece of content. They just want this one thing. So we've introduced this function where you can just simply purchase the one thing for £1.89, which I think is about $2.30 at the current exchange rates. And then that's just yours forever. So there's no sort of commitment there. There's no rolling subscription. It's just that one thing. So that's an option now that's on the website. It's completely live. It's completely available. And please go and enjoy it. And we'll see you all very soon.
I mean, he should really just be exiled from political...
I do understand that he's very popular and people see him as being very charismatic, but I really don't think that anybody should show any sympathy to Boris Johnson. People shouldn't allow themselves to be taken in by the thin, surface-level veneer of charm that he has. Oh, he's a bit bumbling. He's a bit balmy. He's a balmy, bumbling British Prime Minister. I don't care.
That's not what we need.
He betrayed you. He betrayed you. He betrayed the country. He made everything worse. He bowed down to international pressure or just went along with it because it's what he was going to do anyway, to lock the whole country down.
And the best part is, this isn't even like the Tony Blair years where everyone has to sort of speculate on conversations. Boris's WhatsApps were leaked, you may remember, en masse. You can go through and read the conversations. And the rumor about his girlfriend running the country effectively is what everyone keeps talking about in the WhatsApp chats. Where it's like, yeah, Carrie's basically running things. Even Dominic Cummings keeps saying it.
He even says in those WhatsApp chats, you've just reminded me some of the ones where he said that, yeah, it seems to me as though the statistics are pointing that this is only really a deadly disease for those who are a lot older or already have comorbidities, which is what everybody was already saying who had even taken the slightest look into the data. And then he went along with lockdowns anyway.
So literally not even slightly using strength.
And then at the same time, I know that leftists like to harp on this, but it is a reasonable point to harp on, which was that in the meantime, while he was forcing all of us to have to lock down, be away from our families, and put our kids into uncomfortable positions, he was there having parties. All of the ministers underneath him were flaunting their own rules. Matt Hancock was conducting an active affair at the same time.
But sincerely, like everyone in that group, but specifically him, it's just no leadership. Nothing good came of it. In fact, a lot of bad came of it. And what's the net effect? They've got rich. I don't really know why anyone thinks he's a good leader. I don't know why anyone would find him something to support.
I think people see him as charming and they think that he's got, as I mentioned, a surface level charisma to him. But reasonably, that doesn't make up for all of the major shortfalls of him. People were speculating that he might return to the Tory party, and if he returned to the Tory party as a potential leader, that they would be able to win some seats back. No, don't vote for them. I know Carl wants us to join the Tory party so that we can start to exert some influence. I don't want to be part of containment. I don't want to give money to the people who I see as the greatest traitors of this country next to Tony Blair. Because reasonably, they just took Tony Blair's policies and ran with them and made them even worse than Blair did when it was still him in charge. So I see them both as two sides of the same coin. I don't want to give money to any part of that disgusting and corrupt system. That's just my little piece on that. But I thought, what's Boris actually been talking about in this Daily Mail column that he does? Well, he's just talking about that we should just keep throwing money at Israel. Forever wars. Joe Biden said that we need to partake in forever wars, so we just need to keep throwing money at Israel infinitely so that they can have money to have forever wars that we might get dragged into.
So to be honest, I expect this is just current thingism.
Yeah, no,
it's whatever I need to say to gain more support amongst the pathetic right.
Yes, I worked on a kibbutz, so forever wars. I worked on a kibbutz, so sacrifice your children's futures for Israel. Also, occasionally I'll say something obviously commonsensical. Rishi's smoking ban is balmy. We can't cut off the northern leg of HS2. And normies will look at this and go, thank God, we've got a sensible voice finally representing the worries of the normal people.
But you can see what he's doing, which he's just looking at whatever's in the headlines and then being like, Boris Johnson says X. Yeah, that's all that is. There's a lot of criticism.
And when he says that he's going to give his unvarnished opinion to GB News, this is what you can expect. You can expect just current thingism, as you mentioned, and then it's going to be towing the establishment line. Apart from if it's just something that's obviously stupid, like cutting off the northern part of HS2 or the stupid smoking ban that Rishi's trying to do. Unless it's just obviously stupid on the face of it, he will toe the establishment line every step of the way, as he's proven himself to do.
With every penny, my friend.
Yep. Millions of pounds down the drain. Thank you, Boris. Thank you very much. And thank you, GB News, for doing this, because I think we've got our sights on the next high-profile firing of GB News, because I think we can all be pretty certain that it's probably going to be Neil Oliver, because his most recent monologue that I've seen people talking about is just ripping into Boris Johnson, who's just about to join the network. Should we listen to a bit of it? I need to pause it at a brief moment because he starts to make some spurious claims about safe and effective vaccines. But up until that point, then we can hear what he has to say.
Say again that dreadful things keep happening because dreadful people are in charge and suffer no consequences. I also say those dreadful people are invariably cowards, which partly explains why they do those dreadful things, or at least stand by while dreadful events unfold. Cowards are easy to spot, just as dreadful people are easy to spot, just as weak people are easy to spot, for they'll sacrifice actively or passively anyone and everyone they perceive as a threat to their position and burgeoning wealth. And so French Macron, Canadian Trudeau and Kiwi Ardern and more besides keep stepping backwards while simultaneously nudging their populations forwards into harm's way. Another British former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, locked down the country in lockstep with all the rest, leading to death and economic destruction on an unmeasured scale, and pushing.
And that's where I have to end that particular monologue for YouTube's terms and services. But you can tell he's a bit pissed off.
Yeah.
You can tell he's a little bit annoyed, probably that the channel that he's on is about to hire this man and give him a ridiculously high salary.
I'm trying to think who's even left that I'd watch on GB News. I mean, there's Nick Dixon, that does headliners, of course.
I think Farage still has a show on there.
They're like the two interesting. Well, you got Leo as well on headliners, so you got that show.
Yeah, you got them too. Neil Oliver does his weekly.
Andrew Doyle, but then he's kind of working with Nick and whatnot anyway. So
there's like a small gang of people who are entertaining to watch. Neil, who does a once a week monologue, and Nigel.
But I'm more thinking who's going to get cut next, because of course, like, it's not going to stop here.
No, of course not. Well, Neil, if he's going to push this kind of talk, will probably go.
And then,
because he's starting beef with a guy who's literally the former prime minister.
Is it just going to get worse and worse? Because I mean, this is, I forget who Laura is. I think it's Robert Conquest or whatever. Like a place that isn't explicitly right wing will drift leftwards over time. Like, has GB News become a place now that's safe for Tories, and then within 10 years won't even be safe for Tories? It's just going to become Sky News.
Well, it'll depend on who's running behind the scenes. And on that note, let's look into that, because one of the things that I noticed over the weekend was that there was a big hit piece on Calvin from the Times.
Truly the man who has destroyed Britain. This is the man responsible.
You see this face? This is the face of your destruction, Britain. Ooh, look at him. No, he's just a nice guy. We've had him in a few times. He's a nice guy. Strangely,
he actually has a positive vision for the country and is trying to implement it.
This is from the Times, who are nominally a conservative paper, as far as I'm aware. Obviously, moderate centre-right.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelvin, but I think when he was on the show, he mentioned the guy who's buying the Times also owns GB News.
That makes sense. So he's paid for his own hit piece of the guy that's just been fired from his network.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Also, this was written by James Marriott, who I looked into because I thought I recognized that name. He's a former YouTuber who used to do react videos to like Trisha Paytas. Why is he writing this garbage?
I want his opinion on politics.
Why are you writing a garbage hit piece for the Times, for God's sake? But most of it is just really petty and says far more about James, the writer, than it does Calvin, where he's just a Robinson himself, a 37-year-old clergyman from a mixed-race background in Mansfield, was the reactionary right's most recognizable and incendiary new star. Also, its weirdest. Just petty. Petty. Fornication is a sin, he instructed his viewers during a typical episode. Sex outside marriage is a sin. Sodomy is a sin, and so are other homosexual activities. Robinson, who used to describe himself as a small C conservative, is drifting, or perhaps paddling, towards more conspiratorial politics. He is toying.
Wait. It's conspiratorial to say the Bible says this.
Yes, to be a Christian is conspiratorial. But no, it's more to the fact that he's toying with COVID-related Great Reset conspiracy theories, which you can find on many reputable WEF-related websites of them saying, here's our Great Reset plan.
Here's the book.
Here's the book I wrote about it. Conspiracy. And voiced skepticism about vaccines. Most notoriously, he is the author of a viral essay on race relations titled Why Enoch Was Right. Can you believe that he's an actual conservative?
Yes.
Can you believe that he said these things? There's no argument being made here. The argument that's being made here is, look at this. Look at this. Feel bad.
It's one of those actual conservatives. I'm scared.
Yes. Robinson, I mean, here's just an excerpt of a line that's in here. Robinson, who is more charming than his pompous television persona would suggest. What's the point in a line like that, other than to just be a dick? He's not as much of a twat as I expected him to be, is what that sentence really says. What's the point of writing that? But it does actually contain some useful info, and some of the stuff that Calvin was talking about when he was on our show, which is, he explains he'd long expected to be fired from GB News. The channel had a horrible toxic vibe and was riven by an internal civil war between a handful of hardcore right-wing presenters intent on like normal conservatives, I would imagine.
Yeah, when he says hard right presenters, he just called Calvin alt-right a hard right. Like, yeah, come on.
He does actually call him alt-right a number of times and suggest that he is just a frothing at the mouth racist who's clever enough to not admit it. because he thinks that Enoch Powell, in the obviously right things that he said in the Rivers of Blood speech, was obviously right and was actually underestimating the problem.
Well, I mean, that is what the ONS says.
Well, true. He's intent on pushing the boundaries of what it was possible to get away with saying on a terrestrial television station, and their normie opponents were only there because it was a job. When he talked about gay marriage or extramarital sex, the channel's floor managers and producers would reprimand him, telling him, "You can't say that, you can't talk about sin." Which is what we know, that GB News, behind the scenes, is run by a load of normie people, probably leftists, who would have been typically employed by Sky News or BBC
university
News.
students, as he said.
Post-university students who would have been employed by any of these other leftist publications, but just because they had to, ended up on GB News, which they'll be using as a stepping stone to get into higher positions at stations like the BBC and others, because it's just something for them to put on their CV. It's what it is. They don't actually care about the politics. And if they do care about the politics, they see it very negatively. They don't want to associate with somebody like Calvin Robinson. They don't want to be friends with him. They don't want to know him. They don't want to talk to him. They don't want to be near him, because they're afraid that if they are near him, they'll get infected with the conservative ick. Ooh, you might be infected and become a conservative. Ooh, watch out now. But I wanted to, this doesn't actually have anything to do with anything I've been talking about now. I wanted to end this segment on a positive note, give everybody some good news, because GB News, throw that aside, flush it down the toilet. Here's some good news.
The Harry Show is here to stay.
Here's some good news, everybody, which is Sweden. Have you heard of Sweden?
Ja, svenska.
Yes, Sweden's decided that they're going to kick out a load of the migrants that are net economic detriments to them.
What are?
Net economic drains? Sorry, goodbye. Sweden's planning on deporting any migrant who earns under $2,000 per month, estimated at around 30% of immigrants, with plans to increase it to £2,700 per month, citing that recent immigration has caused a totally parallel society. And this isn't just a joke either. This isn't just something that they're saying. This is a piece of legislation that they already put through last November that's coming into effect on Wednesday. On the 1st of November.
There is a God. I am a Christian now.
Told you. I wanted to end on some good news, because good things occasionally do happen. I'm hoping that this doesn't turn into an old switcheroo and we get another Maloney, but this is actual legislation that has been put through where they say everyone who applies for work permits after the 1st of November must have a salary that amounts to at least 80% of the current median salary, a sum that is currently 27,360 Swedish dollary dues. Krona, yes. And the median salary is published by the statistics body on 30th of November 2022. The Parliament approved the bill, which also applies to people who already have work permits, but those work permits, when they come up for renewal, this will apply to them. So if they've already been living in the country, they've got their permit, sorry, you don't earn enough, goodbye.
We only want high-skilled professional immigrants. That's how you implement it. That's brilliant.
Yes. It's a good stepping stone. And Info Migrants talked about this on their website, saying it's a result of Sweden's coalition government that was voted into power last year, which is the coalition between the centre-right party and the explicitly anti-immigrant Swedish Democrat Party, set to introduce reforms. There's stuff on top of that, requiring immigrants from countries outside the European Union to do such simple things. This is a radical move, right? Do you know what they've got to do? Learn Swedish.
Nay.
Can you believe it? They're going to make it harder for non-European migrants to claim benefits by making them learn the language of the country they're moving to.
Can't believe they do this.
I know. It's really disgusting. And also, they have to compete for jobs in the country's labour market. So you have to know the language and compete for jobs. Remarkable. Swedish centre-right Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson's minority government came to power just over a year ago with the support of the anti-immigration and populist Swedish Democrats led by Jimmy Åkesson. Since last September, it's introduced a number of reforms aimed at reducing the number of migrants coming irregularly in Sweden and expelling rejected asylum seekers. The changes include proposals to tighten the conditions for citizenship using DNA analysis to identify migrant individuals, which is quite remarkable, limiting grants of residence permits based on humanitarian grounds, imposing stricter conditions on family reunion visas. So you can't just come into our country and say, well, I've got family, So let them in too. Seems pretty simple. And removing the possibility to apply for a work visa following rejection of an asylum application. Brilliant. Among the government's proposed reforms is a move to introduce a ceiling on benefits for non-EU migrants so they cannot receive multiple allowances at the same time, such as for children, housing, unemployment, sickness, and parental leave. In addition, migrants will have to wait longer in future before qualifying for benefits. These are all fantastic first steps. And if they go along with the legislation that's going to come into place on Wednesday as well, this will all be fantastic incentive for migrants not to move to Sweden and go elsewhere. Hopefully not to England, but if Sweden, which was formerly probably the most liberal and accepting, they talk about in this article how...
Well, the most insane. They were never accepting.
Yeah, they were the most insane. They just took in anybody and everybody who showed up. If Sweden is doing this and they actually go ahead with it, if they actually enforce this and these proposed reforms actually become reality, and we don't just get a switcheroo Maloney, which is always a threat. Sad to bring those back to reality for a moment. That's always a threat that they'll just say it and don't end up doing it. But if they do end up doing it, it could set the pace for the rest of Europe, given that Sweden is the place that people look to as, even America looks over at Sweden as the kind of, Sweden, Norway, Denmark as the ideal liberal democracies to take inspiration from. So who knows? Hopefully that works for Sweden, and hopefully other countries in Europe can learn a lesson or two from it as well. So I know that had nothing to do with GB News, but I thought it was good news. I couldn't really fit in anywhere else. So there you go.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplations series, this episode on the debate about liberalism, part 2. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.